New forensic science developments in forensic science helped it, and not only did this murder devastate her family, it changed the law. The man we now know responsible for her death refused to give samples, and that led to a landmark decision that still shapes forensic work today.
I don't always cover really old cold cases. I don't always really like to either, to be honest. But every once in a while, I'll come across a story that's so fucked up, I feel compelled to talk about it. And this happens to be one of those cases. A young, beautiful mom, her 22-year-old's mom, her 20-month-old son, and a murder that never should have happened. A fear she felt so greatly that she had her apartment checked hours prior to the whole thing happening. And the perpetrator that was on the police radar, okay, ready, get this one. The perpetrator that was on the police radar ended up getting cleared due to a mistake. This is the tragic story of Judith Judy Lord. Hi guys, welcome or welcome back. Thank you so much for being here. It's so greatly appreciated. It truly, truly is. Before I get started, let me give you my usual disclaimer. This video is for educational purposes only. Please do not take what I say as fact. Please always do your own research and come to your own conclusions. Next, if you have not liked, subscribed, or commented yet, please consider doing so because it really helps me out and I really, really appreciate it. So, Judith Lord. She was born on May 6, 1953 in Maine before her family relocated to New Hampshire. She's the 11th of 14 children in her family. Could you imagine? 14 kids. Jesus Christ. I think I have a bed with two. Judy was described as a vibrant member of her community. She had a lot of friends, and she was somebody who connected people with her music. Often seen on her steps playing her guitar while her little baby would play in the grass. In 1971, while in New Hampshire, she would meet her future husband, Gregory Lord, who was actually on military leave at the time. The two married on May 14th, 1973, before Judith decided to join her now husband at his new station in Germany. While in Germany, Judy would give birth to the couple's first and only child, a little boy that they named Gregory. And it was during this time that Judy confided in friends and family that she was experiencing mental, emotional, and physical abuse from her new husband. However, the allegations were never reported to police by Judith or her friends or her family. Then in October of 1974, Judith, Gregory, and the baby returned to the United States, moving into an apartment on Spring Street in downtown Concord, New Hampshire. Gregory found employment at the New Hampshire State Hospital. Then in March of 1975, the couple would move to the Concord Garden apartment complex. Building 19, apartment 4, to be specific. This is where the whole kit and caboodle shit goes down. May 4th, 1975, Concord police responded to a DV call at the couple's apartment. When officers arrived, Judith met them and explained the situation. And according to Judith, Greg picked her up from work that day and began an argument with her on the ride home. She says the situation escalated in the master bedroom after they got home that night. She claims that Greg came out of their walk-in closet and struck Judy in the face repeatedly, saying that the only thing that made him stop were her screams. Officers observed 2 black eyes, a lump on the back of her head, and dried blood around her mouth. Gregory Lord was arrested the following day pursuant to a warrant for simple assault. He pled guilty and was fined $100, which in today's day would be equivalent to about $558.89. After his release, Greg moved out of the apartment, taking all of the furniture with him, which is such bullshit. How are you going to do that to your wife and baby, that you're getting kicked out of the apartment because you put your hands on her and you take all the furniture? You know, you're a stand-up fucking guy. only leaving her with the couple's bed and the baby's crib. How nice of you. Based on numerous interviews with witnesses, investigators were able to piece together the events of Monday, May 19th, 1975, Judith's last day on Earth. At around 4 p.m., Judith and her estranged husband went over to the bank so Judith could cash her check before picking up her son. At around 8 o'clock p.m., Judith and some of her neighbors, including Linda Gable and Jeff Coda, went to a volleyball game behind the apartment complex. After the game was done, Judy, Linda, and Jeff went over to Linda's apartment for coffee. Linda and her husband Ernest, this all matters by the way, I promise. Linda and her husband Ernest lived next door to Judith and shared a common wall. While hanging out at the Gables, Judith expressed her concern for her safety inside her apartment and asked Ernest, which is the neighbor's husband, to go check it out for her. Remember I told you that. After checking the entire apartment, Judith grabbed 3 cans of Pepsi, locked the apartment back up, and headed over to Linda and Gables. She hung out there for the rest of the evening. Then at around 11:30 p.m., Judy went back home. She made one quick stop back over to the Gables for a pair of shoes before finally leaving for the evening, being the last time they ever saw her. At around 12 a.m., Linda reported hearing Judith's shower running because they share the common wall. Between 12:45 and 12:50, Judith's other neighbor, Ernest Theodore Gable, arrived home for the night. Okay, Ernest Theodore Gable, aka Ernie Stanberry. He has aliases because he's a common criminal. Was born on November 11th, 1950 in Laredo, Mississippi. Because he came from military parents, he spent most of his childhood moving from state to state and school to school. Despite coming from 2 parents that served our country, Ernest Gable has an incredibly long rap sheet by the time he became neighbors with Judith. Crimes that included Falls River, Massachusetts, arrested for breaking and entering. New Bedford, Massachusetts, arrested for breaking, entering, and larceny. Concord, New Hampshire, he's arrested for providing false information related to a firearm and for possession of a dangerous weapon. Merrimack County, New Hampshire, he's arrested for possession of a controlled substance. Joliet, Illinois, he's arrested for murder. Joliet, Illinois, he's arrested for armed robbery. In LA, California, he had a series of arrests for robbery, burglary, theft, forgery, and use of controlled substances. In a 1978 investigation, officers stumbled across a pattern of sexual coercion and violence within his relationships, with multiple former girlfriends coming forward to talk about the proclivity for combining sex acts with and the big R word. JM, obviously they're all initials for privacy reasons. JM, who dated him in 1973, told investigators that he wanted her to act like he was R-wording her. He wanted me to scream, kick, and scratch. Going on to say that on another occasion, he grabbed her by the throat with 2 hands and began to squeeze, telling police she kicked, scratched, and screamed before being able to get loose and run out of the house. CO, who dated him in 1974, had a similar experience, telling investigators that he once put a pillow over my face while we were intimate. She also spoke about a time when he held her down on the couch and tried to orally R-word her. September 29th, 1975, a man by the name of Alan Bassett, a former roommate of Gable's, said that during one occasion with CO, when she refused his advances, he began to leaving visible red marks around her neck. In November of 1976, Gable's ex-wife Linda told police that he had also been with her in the past as well. going on to say that there was a consistent pattern of behavior with him wanting to choke her or with a pillow during intimate times, wanting to stimulate our wording. Also in November of 1976, after being released from the Merrimack House of Corrections, Gable drives over to his estranged wife's house. He asks to take the girls to dinner. She refuses, so he leaves and he returns with the Falls River Police Department. Officers convince her to let the kids go to dinner with their father. Okay. Gable would end up taking those children and not return with them for 14 years. 14 years. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? At approximately 1:30 a.m., a neighbor by the name of Barbara Noel heard a woman screaming. She would later identify the screams as sounding like Judith's voice, saying she heard the woman screaming, "Leave me alone, leave me alone," before saying that the screams became muffled for a few seconds, as if somebody was putting a hand over her mouth, which is actually important. Comes up later on. Another neighbor by the name of Larry Caraway, who happens to share a bedroom wall with Judith, claimed he heard the bed really start banging away. Sounds that he interpreted as two people having relations, sounds that continued for an extended period of time. May 20th, 1975 at 12:20 p.m., operation manager for the Concord Garden Apartments, Mr. Joseph McVeigh, knocked on the door of 22-year-old Judith Lord. He was there to collect some past due rent at the time. Nobody came to the door, but after he heard a baby crying for an extended period of time, he decided to enter the apartment, and thank God that he did. He found Judith in the upstairs bedroom, laying in the bed with a blue plastic bag covering her face. After discovering that she was gone, he immediately called police. When police arrived at the scene, they discovered just pure horror. There's a torn green curtain, a broken curtain rod, broken cigarettes scattered on the floor and the bed. There's also an alarm clock that's laying on the floor stuck at 1:47, which would become crucial in determining the timeline of the whole thing. The bed was pulled away from the wall, which the neighbor said, yeah, that's what he was hearing. On the floor near the alarm clock was a small mirror and a lampshade that had been knocked off. Judith was found lying completely naked on her bed on her back. A purple towel was at the foot of the bed, still damp from Judith's shower, along with stiff stains that represent semen. A white baby bath towel was also found near the bed with two more stiff semen stains. In the bathroom, they found Judith's clothes that she wore to the volleyball game that night on the floor, and the toilet seat was in the upright position. In other words, at some point he probably took a piss there. Thankfully, Judith's 20-month-old son was found in the adjacent bedroom in his crib unharmed. Investigators collected 5 hairs that were determined to be from an African American. 1 from Judith's hand, 1 from her lower abdomen, and 3 from the bed sheets she was laying on. These hairs, along with cuttings from the semen-stained towels and blood-stained pillowcases, would become crucial to the case decades later, 50 to be exact. Judith's autopsy was performed on May 20, 1975 by Dr. Merritt Moon. Dr. Moon found multiple scratch marks and abrasions on Judith's face and neck. Marks on her lips and left cheek indicated that the left hand of her attacker was held over her nose and mouth, which is what the neighbor said. It sounded like muffled screams. During the autopsy, 9 pieces of evidence were collected that would later become crucial, including fingernail scrapings from both hands, vaginal fluid samples, and a single stray hair recovered from the palm side of the middle finger of Judith's left hand. During the examination, Dr. Moon also found semen inside of her, concluding that her cause of death was manual and her manner of death was homicide. The investigation centers around three people. Her estranged husband, Gregory Lord, because it always does. That's just a given. Her neighbor, Larry Caraway, and her other neighbor, Ernest Ernie Gables. Gregory Lord was the initial suspect. Not because he was the estranged husband, well, probably because he was the estranged husband, but more importantly, because he had a history of DV when it came to Judith. The cops were just there not long before this. Along with the fact that he pled guilty to these allegations, remember the $100 fine, but also multiple people came forward to say that Judith was afraid of him. Greg Lord didn't do himself any favors when it came to proving his innocence. On the night of everything, during an interview with police, Lord said, "What do you think I then effed her while she was getting stiff? Do you think I'm some sort of perv?" So obviously this raised a lot of red flags, because not only did he know exactly what happened at the scene, but none of this information was known to anybody except the cops and the person responsible. So this pushed him right to the front of the suspect list. But Greg Lord provided an alibi for that night that would end up being corroborated, telling investigators that he went fishing with his brother that day and then returned to his grandmother's apartment around 10 p.m., where he remained for the rest of the evening. His grandmother would later say that this was the truth, and she knows that because she was with him all evening. He also agreed to take 2 polygraph tests. One on May 20th, 1975, that was deemed inconclusive due to the mental state that Mr. Lord was in at the time. Then a second polygraph was taken on July 30th, 1975, and the results of that test were a conclusive pass, stating that there was no doubt that this man was telling the truth. He was also brought in to be checked by a doctor for any marks or scratches to his body. Doctors noted that there were no marks that were consistent with a struggle, and that Mr. Lord's nails were very short. Why is this important? Because the scratches that were on Judith were done by somebody with really long nails. Gregory Lord is removed from the suspect list. As far as him being privy to the information about the attack that was not released to the public, there's actually a reasonable explanation dictated in court papers that read. Because yes, I was like, what? But Greg Lord's statements created a conflicting puzzle for the original investigators. On one hand, he had corroborated alibi and, as was later determined, no physical evidence linked him to the scene. On the other hand, his spontaneous utterance demonstrated a shocking and specific knowledge of the crime that an innocent person would not be expected to possess. Okay, so I first thought, oh, he set this up. That's how he knows, because he hired this guy to do it. No, I was wrong. However, upon further review of the investigative materials, it was learned that shortly after the first officers arrived, but before the scene was fully secured, Mr. Lord entered the apartment unchallenged, ran upstairs to the master bedroom. So he saw it. One officer's report indicated that this happened while the first 4 officers were on the second floor, leaving the front door unguarded and the scene therefore unsecured. Mr. Lord confirmed that his own statement saying he saw the police and he went over and went upstairs and she was laying in bed. An officer reported telling Mr. Lord that his wife was dead and that he needed to leave the apartment. This statement alone was enough to keep him as the prime suspect until he was ultimately eliminated by the physical evidence and the mounting forensic circumstantial case against Ernest Gable. There's some shit coming. Because Greg Lord was able to see Mrs. Lord's body on the bed, he likely observed that she was nude and injured, such as the scrapes on her neck, and that were noted by the first responding officers. This would explain how he knew that she had been, which was a key point of suspicion in his later statement to police. Reports also noted that there was no indication that Mr. Lord touched or disturbed anything in the room before he was asked to leave. Okay, in regard to the second suspect, Judith's neighbor, Larry Caraway. Larry Caraway, Judith's other next door neighbor, was a key witness who also was briefly considered as a suspect. His proximity to the crime and his detailed account of the sounds of that night made him a crucial part to the initial investigation. However, several factors quickly rendered his testimony unreliable, though he was still excluded as the perpetrator. Larry Caraway's testimony was initially one of the most significant pieces of evidence directing suspicion towards Mr. Lord. This is some shit. Okay. On the day of Mr. Caraway told investigators that with certainty that he heard Judith Lord scream Mr. Lord's name multiple times during the attack, saying, "What are you doing here, Greg?" And "No, Greg, no." This powerful account, coming from a neighbor whose bedroom shared a common wall with Judith Lord, and made Greg Lord the immediate focus of the investigation. However, Mr. Caraway's credibility quickly eroded. During a sworn deposition on May 21st, 1975, he was asked directly if he ever had a sexual affair with Judith Lord, which he unequivocally denied. Mr. Caraway's representation would be contradicted by other witnesses. Investigators soon learned from multiple sources that Judith Lord's best friend, Rebecca Dunbar, and later Linda Gable, that Judith was having an affair with Mr. Caraway. This deception about the nature of his relationship with Judith cast serious doubt on the veracity of his entire statement. In other words, he was Judith's lover. Well, he was Judith's married lover. So maybe he hated Greg. Maybe Greg knew. I don't know. But basically, he's trying to pin the whole thing on Greg. It's not the husband. It's definitely not the husband. I can tell you that. In the wife's deposition, she stated that she heard yelling and sounds of a struggle, but that she only heard Judith's voice and did not hear any others, failing to confirm her husband's key claim of hearing Mr. Lord's name. A clear bias against Mr. Lord was also established in a November 1976 interview when Linda Gable told officers that Mr. Caraway always talked about how he hated Gregory Lord. She stated that Mr. Caraway was so afraid of potential confrontation with Mr. Lord that he often carried a gun in case Mr. Lord came after him. This animosity and fear, likely compounded by his secret affair with Judith, provided a strong motive for the neighbor to intentionally misdirect the police by naming Mr. Lord as the attacker. This theory is supported by Mr. Caraway's own actions years later in a follow-up interview, March 29th, 1978, where he significantly changed his story, telling investigators that he was no longer sure if he heard Mr. Lord's voice, and he admitted that it could have been Ernest Gable. Then, in the cold case reinvestigation in January of 2008, Mr. Caraway changed his story yet again, revealing to his original 1975 statement that he heard Mr. Lord's name, that he heard Gregory Lord's name. He claimed that his 1978 recanting was the result of him telling investigators what he believed they wanted to hear. Due to his concealed relationship with Judith, his documented animosity towards Greg, the lack of corroboration from his wife, and his multiple conflicting statements, his testimony is considered unreliable, and despite the suspicion his actions created, Mr. Caraway was ruled out as a suspect. Mr. Gable's advances and Judith Lord's fears. A consistent and disturbing theme emerged from multiple independent witness interviews conducted in the days and weeks following her death. Judith Lord was afraid of Ernest Gable, and the fear was a direct result of his persistent and unwanted advances towards her. On May 20th, 1975, the day everything happened, Judith's older sister Linda told an officer that just 10 days earlier, on May 10th, Judith had come to her house because she was afraid to stay alone. Judith told her sister she was afraid of both her husband and her African-American neighbor next door, indicating Mr. Gable because he had made remarks to her about wanting to see her nude. Meanwhile, he's married, by the way. Yeah, he's married at the time. This account was corroborated by another neighbor, Paula Burgos. Ms. Burgos told investigators that Judith had confided in her about an incident that occurred around May 10th, 1975. While Ernie Gable's wife, Linda Gable, was out of town, he came to Judith's apartment at approximately 2 o'clock in the morning. Judith, who had been sleeping, answered the door to find Gable standing there. He asked her if she wanted to party with him, and an invitation that she declined before immediately returning to bed. Judith also described her fear of Mr. Gable to those outside her circle of family and neighbors. Several of her former co-workers at the nursing home told investigators that Judith expressed concern about an African-American man who lived near her. One co-worker specifically recalled Judith saying that this man was always bothering her and hanging around her doors and windows. Adding to this disturbing pattern, Judith told her co-worker Christine about a week before her death that she was afraid of the African-American man who lived beside her, again indicating Mr. Gable. Furthermore, Judith confided in Ida Richardson, whom she'd only known for 2 days. That's how scared this poor woman was. She only knew this woman for 2 days, and she's like, please listen to my story. Please help me. I'm scared. That's fucked up. That's fucked up. Expressing her fear of the African-American man who lived near her. Ernest Gable's predatory interest in Judith was not something that he kept to himself either, by the way. His known associate, Thomas Roz, told investigators that Mr. Gable used to talk about Judith, referring to her as the girl next door who was living alone and how he would like to make it with her. Thomas recounted an instance where Mr. Gable pointed Judith out to him and made the remark, someday I'm going to get me a piece of that white meat. What a piece of shit. Analysis of fingernail and fingerprint evidence. One of the most compelling pieces of physical evidence linking Ernest Gable to the crime scene was discovered on May 23rd, 1975, when the New Hampshire State Police lab matched 5 latent fingerprints from the exterior of Judith Lord's front window to Ernest Gable.
With 5 fingerprints on her window and 5 hairs on her body, new DNA testing confirmed what investigators long suspected. Gable was Judy's killer.
The prints were located on the glass in a manner consistent with somebody pushing the window open to gain entry. When confronted with this evidence, Ernest Gable provided 2 conflicting and illogical explanations. Shocker. He first claimed he only entered the apartment through a rear window on a previous occasion when Judith locked herself out. When pressed, he changed his story, claiming him and the neighbor, Larry, had leaned on the front window to talk to some girls inside, but he could not explain how the prints came to be on the glass itself. During this questioning, he became extremely nervous and ceased all cooperation with investigators. Another key piece of physical evidence came in the form of scratches on Judith Lord's face and neck. The autopsy report concluded that the attacker did not have particularly short fingernails, which Greg Lord did. This finding stood in stark contrast to the condition of Mr. Lord's hands. An investigator noted the later search warrant affidavit that within days of he had examined Ernest Gable's fingernails and found them to be slightly longer than normal. This finding stood in stark contrast to the condition of Mr. Lord's hands. This observation was corroborated during an interview with Mr. Gable on May 23rd, 1975. When confronted with the fact that his fingerprints were on Miss Lord's window, Mr. Gable became extremely nervous. Why? The investigator noted this in his report as a clear demonstration that Mr. Gable's fingernails were, in fact, long enough and capable of inflicting the type of scratch marks found on Judith Lord. Gable's initial statement to police. On the afternoon of everything, May 20th, 1975, Ernest Gable gave investigators a timeline of his activities from the previous night. He stated he worked at Hazel Green Restaurant in Concord until 8:20 p.m., then spent time in the downstairs lounge and an upstairs apartment at that location before returning to the lounge until last call at 12:30 a.m. He claimed he then waited for a coworker to give him a ride home, arriving at his apartment between 12:45 and 12:50 a.m. Okay. This time frame was corroborated by his coworker who said they left the restaurant around 12:35 a.m. This timeline is crucial because it places Mr. Gable at the front door of his apartment, which is just feet away from Judith's apartment at the very beginning of the window of when everything happened. The first screams from Judith that were reported by neighbors were heard at approximately 1:30 a.m. That gave him a 40-minute window of opportunity where his whereabouts were unaccounted for by anyone but himself and his wife, who was asleep. The most significant part of Gable's statement in his admission that he heard a disturbance next door. He told investigators, while at his front door, he thought he heard somebody scream, but he saw some cats on his left, basically saying that because the cats were out there and because he had been drinking, he thought the screams were coming from the cats. Really? Because I'm thinking, I haven't owned many cats in my life. I'm more of a dog person. But I'm thinking that you can tell the difference between a cat scream and a woman that's fearing for her life. I'm thinking the screams are a little different even if you're drunk. He then claims he went inside and went upstairs to go to bed and heard somebody running up the stairs in the next apartment, apartment number 4, which happens to be Judith's apartment. After that, he heard a thud like somebody had fallen down. He then laid down in the bed and fell asleep quickly. This statement was revealing for several reasons. First, it placed him at the scene at the exact time that everything happened. And second, his description of her scream and a thud aligns with the sound of the struggle heard by neighbors. His attempt to dismiss the scream as cat fighting appears to be a self-serving effort to downplay his knowledge of the event. The following morning, before Judith's body was even found, he told the babysitter that Judith and her old man couldn't be hitting it off too well after the noise I had heard last night, further indicating that he was aware of a significant disturbance and was proactively creating a false narrative to blame it on Gregory Lord. Poor Greg Lord. Like, I get that he's kind of a shitty person for what he did, to her while they were married, but I mean, to pin for two separate people to pin on him, that's fucked up. Fucked up. Ernest Gable's background and criminal history. A review of the state and federal records revealed an extensive criminal history for Mr. Gable spanning from 1969 to 1985 under his own name and his alias Ernest Stanberry, which he began using right after Judith Lord's death. According to the investigative files, after the FBI determined that the hairs found at the crime scene were African American, investigators identified 5 African American men, including Ernest Gable, living in the Concord apartments at the time. Investigators approached each one of them, doing their due diligence, and all of the men, other than Mr. Gable, voluntarily cooperated with police, provided statements, gave hair, saliva, and in some cases blood for comparison. Their cooperation and subsequent analysis of their samples effectively ruled them out as suspects, leaving Ernest Gable as the only one who refused to cooperate and ultimately the only person whose biological information matched evidence recovered from the scene.
For years, a man named Ernest Theodore Gable was the suspect. He was 24 years old at the time and Lord's next-door neighbor with a lengthy arrest history. The AG's office says that at the time, Lord had told her friends that she was afraid of him. Even though all the evidence pointed to Gable, investigators say that a flawed hair analysis by the FBI threw off this case for decades, incorrectly and unfairly exonerating Gable.
Okay, I know what you're all thinking. How did they F this up? Well, they did. They did. The 1975 FBI hair comparison. In a report dated December 16th, 1975, the FBI's forensic laboratory, using the technique of microscopic hair comparison, concluded that the hairs from the scene were microscopically different from Ernest Gable's and did not originate from him. At the time, the state of New Hampshire had been prepared to indict and prosecute Ernest Gable for the death of Judith Lord. The FBI's conclusion, however, created a significant evidentiary hurdle that prosecutors felt they could not overcome, and the active investigation was effectively halted. In other words, back in the day, the hair follicle test was considered top tier. DNA wasn't a thing. So the hair follicle test was considered their top tier. They screwed it up and basically let him off the hook. Despite everything else, they fucked it up. Case goes cold and it's reopened. Following the FBI lab's microscopic hair comparison report with no new leads, the active investigation into Judith Lord's death ceased and the case went cold for years. The case remained dormant. In 2003, nearly 3 decades after her death, Concord Police Detective Todd Flanagan officially reopened the case. The catalyst was a motion filed by the Merrimack County Superior Court. After serving as a detective with Concord Police Department, Todd Flanagan became the Deputy Chief Investigator for the New Hampshire Department of Justice. Good for you, dude. He transitioned to the New Hampshire Cold Case Unit as a full-time investigator in 2025, and thank God he did, because he's the only one that was able to crack this bad boy open. Seeking court transcripts related to the original investigation. The legal action prompted a fresh review of the entire case file and led to the crucial decision to resubmit the physical evidence collected in 1975 for modern forensic analysis, setting the stage for the eventual DNA breakthrough. As part of a cold case review, the semen-stained towels were subjected to modern DNA analysis with the New Hampshire State Police Lab, ultimately confirming that DNA from the semen and sperm on both towels are a statistical match for Ernest Gable. The approximate frequency of the partial DNA profile obtained from the evidence was 1 in 6.5 million in the African American population. This re-examination allowed for a correct interpretation of the DNA evidence, which subsequently provided a direct link to the SA and murder of Judith Lord.
Judy was a kind person who loved her son very much.
Diane Lord helped raise Judy's son with his father.
When we got married, he was 4. He would call me Mom.
The son wrote a statement for the announcement.
We've been distraught for too long. My only hope is that this closure brings peace to my mother's family.
Okay, so had Ernest Gable been alive today, he would have been arrested and charged with first-degree murder. But he's dead. On February 1st, 1987, at approximately 6:35 p.m., Ernest Gable, then using the alias Ernest Stanberry, was stabbed once in the chest during an argument on a street in Los Angeles, California. The dispute was believed to be over a money debt. Ernest Gable was transported to Good Samaritan Hospital, where he died as a result of his wound. He was 36 years old. Los Angeles police later arrested a man named William Sandoval for his murder. Fucker got away with it. But, I mean, did get stabbed to death, so there's that. So, you know.
Demonstrates that no cold case is ever truly closed until we find the truth, and that time is only one impediment. Time is also an asset, because we will continue to work year after year, decade after decade, until we find the answers in these cases.
If you guys are still here, thank you, thank you, thank you. I love you, and I appreciate you so, so, so very much. Please like, subscribe, and comment if you haven't yet, and you feel so inclined to, because it really helps me out, and I really appreciate it. And until next time, stay safe out there.